Alright, so in today's video, I'm going to explain what Agile development means and also how I use Notion to implement it for my own projects. So straight out of the gate, for the people who are just looking for a quick answer to this question, Agile development is a set of values and principles that guide decision making in a project. Instead of rules and tools, it's values and principles, with the main idea being that you can create the rules and choose the tools if you know the values and principles to strive for. Agile is often used in project management for software development projects, but it can be used to run pretty much any type of project, as you'll see. I can't really remember where I heard this, but there's this story that was going around back in the day of this store in the US called Macy's, and basically the story was that they had such a liberal return policy that you could basically go in there and return clothes that you hadn't even bought there, that you'd bought in a completely different store, and also other stories that you'd basically, like, you could call them up and order a pizza and they would find a way to deliver that pizza to you. And these are probably stories that are quite exaggerated and closer to urban myths than actual truths, but they do illustrate the point that values and principles travel a lot better than tools and techniques. You could imagine that Macy's had probably instilled a value that it should be almost easier to return things than to buy them, or something along those lines. That way, without telling the employees exactly how and when to allow customers to return things, the employees would still understand how and when. Macy's could basically just have a value or principle that would be like, it should be easier to return things than to actually buy things. And that's kind of a crazy principle or value to have, but it would also give the employees a lot of autonomy in their decision making. And that kind of value would probably instill a lot more confidence in the employees in making their own decisions, as compared to like having a long list of steps that they need to go through for each return that was made. If a customer comes into Macy's with a shirt they want to return, with the reason that they realize they just don't want it anymore, then the employee with a list of steps may not find a clear protocol for handling this type of return, because the customer has had the shirt and worn it for 2 months. So this employee then needs to ask a supervisor what to do. This supervisor also becomes unsure and decides to call the store manager, who then very timidly makes the decision to allow the customer to return the shirt. On the other hand, if that same customer comes into a store where the value is that it should be easier to return than to buy, then the employee who handles that customer probably feels a lot more confident actually making the decision to allow the customer to return the shirt without actually asking their supervisors. And that's why values and principles are so effective, because with them, you can figure out the rest. An example of how Agile does this is one of the 12 values that Agile consists of, which is face-to-face conversations is the best form of communication. This doesn't tell you that you should use FaceTime over Skype or Google Hangouts. It doesn't tell you when to do face-to-face meetings. It simply tells you what you should prefer. If you know that face-to-face communication is something to strive for, then you may decide to do a FaceTime call instead of a text message. And it doesn't really matter what tool you use, as long as it's capable of implementing the idea. So Agile gives you a lot of freedom and also your team a lot of autonomy in their decision making. And that's really important, because everyone needs to be able to make a certain amount of decisions on their own, because otherwise the leader might actually end up just micromanaging every single decision that's made and basically just wasting their time doing things that other people could do. So that is why Agile focuses on values and principles over processes and tools. And these are the Agile values and principles, or the Agile Manifesto. 1. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. 2. Working software over comprehensive documentation. 3. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. 4. Responding to change over following a plan. While there is value in the items on the right, Agile values the items on the left more. Now let's go through what the key values and principles are and how I use them with Notion in order to manage all of my own projects. Alright, so for organization, I have started to use something called Scrum. What I'm using for that is Notion. And here's my Notion page essentially. And what I've done is I've created 2 workspaces to keep track of my YouTube videos and also my sponsor schedules for sponsored videos. If we press this YouTube workspace, we can see that we have a couple of different views that you can create. So you can create different views related to each workspace that you're in. I'm using Scrum as like the skeleton for how I'm building building this thing out. So within Scrum, you usually have sprints, and what I'm doing is I'm doing 2-week sprints. And that essentially means that we first have a sprint planning meeting where we decide like, what are we going to do within the next 2 weeks? And that planning meeting is done in Google Hangouts. And that's probably, or usually, a little bit of a longer meeting where we actually figure out like, okay, what type of videos are we going to do for the next 2 weeks, and what titles are going to go where, and when am I going to actually make those videos. And then we decide on an actual sprint. So if you take a look at this view, because you can create different views here, and you can decide whether you want it to be a table or a board or a calendar or a list or a gallery. And what we do is we first of all, we start out with the sprint view, and this is the current sprint that we're in right now. And as you can see, we have like different videos that we've completed for the past 2 weeks. They have been moved into the published column. And then we have the to-dos, which are the videos that we're going to do that we haven't done yet. And as you're watching this video, I think I've published this video at that time. So this one is right now filming. Then we have the Q&A, we have crypto wallet vlog, and then we have what is Agile framework for software development. And that's the video that you're watching right now. So we move that into filming when I'm filming it, and then we move it into editing while it's editing, and then published once it's actually published. And so what we start out with is actually reviewing the past 2 weeks of sprint, and we see like, okay, what videos did we get done, and hopefully we got the videos done that we wanted to get done. Then we go into this here, which is the backlog, which is essentially, as soon as I come up with a video idea, I just go in here and I press add, and then I just type in my video ideas, and then they get added in here. And then once we have the planning meeting, the sprint planning meeting, we go through these video ideas and we decide like, okay, maybe we should do this in this week's sprint, which we change the status into to do, and then it's in our sprint here. And that's something that's super useful with Notion, is the ability to kind of do these things automatically. Like, you don't have to actually go into the sprint and then press add and like find the thing that you want to add, which is something that sometimes can be with these sort of like project management tools, that you actually have to do everything manually, or there's a lot of manual labor for doing these sort of things. But here everything's like automatic, it just happens when we go through the things. And so that's what we do next. We go through all these ideas, decide what are we going to do for the next 2 weeks. And then once we're done with like figuring out 2 weeks worth of video ideas that we're going to try to actually complete, then we start to discuss like, how are we actually going to complete these videos, and how are we going to maintain like a sustainable pace, which again ties into the Agile value or principle of like maintaining a constant pace, or essentially you just like sustainable pacing. You want to do something in a way that where the pace of what you're doing is sustainable, so that you can do it kind of indefinitely. So that's always the goal, to figure out a way to do all of this with less overwhelm and kind of less stress. And it also ties into the point of reflecting over becoming more effective and kind of adjusting to that according to what we figure out during this meeting. And so that's kind of what a sprint planning meeting is like. We started out with Google Hangouts, then we go through, we do a screen sharing type thing where I share my screen, and then we just look at the previous sprint, go to the backlog, figure out what ideas we're going to use, put them into the to-do, or change the status of them to to-do, and then they're in our sprint. We can actually get started with the next sprint. Another really useful thing is that for this YouTube workspace, I've picked what type of things I want to keep, or what type of details I want for each project, which is like each video. So those are all the things that I think are really important. And then I've also created a template here called video, and if we press this, then this will make this page into a video template page, or it will add a couple details here that I actually got from Ali Abdal, who's like this productivity YouTuber that I watch sometimes, and he showed me some of these things with one of the videos that he made, and he showed how he kind of uses Notion with these sort of things to kind of simplify his YouTube workflow, which I thought was really, really interesting. And so yeah, that you can do a lot of these things to really flesh out your projects and kind of automate things that you would have to add in anyway. So that's something that I really like, that you can do this. And what I think is really good about this is kind of getting another overview of what the video ideas are that I have. But it's something that I don't really want to see in the sprint because there's just too many of these columns. And I like for the sprint to be kind of more easily overviewable. So you can just like have 4 columns here: to do, filming, editing, published. It kind of gives a better flow to the whole workflow, I guess. And then what we have is, once we've made this into a video, and once we've decided like, okay, this video is going to be published on November 10th, then it automatically gets added into this thing, which is the video schedule. And if we do this, then we can see that we have all of these videos in this schedule here, which is really good. When am I actually going to publish the videos and what day are we at right now? So essentially one of the main points of Notion to me is the fact that you can do so much stuff in one place. Instead of having to have like one project management tool separately that you'd go into and just like plan out the sprint, and then one other tool where you'd like get the video ideas for, and one separate tool for keeping track of sponsors, and then a third tool for actually like Google Calendar for actually tracking when the videos are going to be published. And then we also have the sponsor schedule, which is something that could probably be just another view in the YouTube workspace. But it's something that I created a separate workspace for this because I kind of like to have just that as like 2 different main workspaces. So this one is just for sponsors. And what I've done here is I've added a couple of different things. And one of the things is like a roll up here that can find different things. So this basically finds the publication date for different videos. So as you can see here, we have what is Agile framework. That's a relation to the video, which is a part of this YouTube workspace. And that then finds the date for when that video is supposed to be published. So let's say that we have this kite video here that's published. We can then go to here and we can add in what video that actually was. And that video was best text editor for programming. And so as you can see here, it changes the video status to published. It also changes the date to November 6th. So that's a really useful thing to kind of see when the publication dates are, and also the status of the sponsor. So I have different statuses like review, published, confirmed, filmed, on hold, negotiation. And that way we can kind of see like where we're at in the process of actually booking this sponsor in. So that's another really useful thing with Notion. All right, so that's essentially how my sprint planning kind of works, and how the process of an actual sprint, how my Scrum methodology for managing my projects kind of works within a sprint. And then for our other communication, so it's text-based communication, we use Slack. And the reason that I like to use Slack is because you can use different channels, as you can see here. You've probably been part of like group texts or especially like on Facebook, where you have that group messaging and people are messaging, or like WhatsApp, and people are messaging in there, and most of the stuff is not related to you at all. And that way, channels in Slack is something that's really useful because you're all part of all of the channels, and you can also decide if there's a specific channel where just like one of the member or 2 of the members are allowed to be in. And that way, if you're like 4 people in the team, then you could have a channel where you and the second member are in, and then one separate channel where just you and the third member, and then you and the 4th member. And that way you wouldn't have to hear about all of the different conversations that all of the other people are having. That's a really useful part of Slack. Is something that I can really recommend for text-based communication. Okay, so these are the tools that I use in my workflow to support my Agile process. Notion for planning and organizing videos, Google Drive for uploading video files for editors, Google Hangouts for meetings, and Slack for text-based communication. The last two are not even what I would consider tools really, because they can be replaced by others without it making much of a difference. Google Drive could also be replaced by Dropbox, iCloud, etc. Even though I do think that Google does it best, but still there's not a major difference. Notion, on the other hand, cannot really be replaced in my opinion. There's no other tool that does all of these things, and no other tool that I feel makes as much sense as Notion does. So I highly recommend that you check Notion out, and that's basically it for this one. I hope I was able to explain or showcase kind of what Agile is and how it works. And I think that it's really quite a confusing concept because of the fact that it's not a concept, or it's not like a methodology, or it's not tied to a certain tool, and it can be used with lots of different tools, which means that you might read about it in a certain place where they explain that they use it with Scrum, and in a different place they use something else. And so it kind of may feel like it is everything and nothing at the same time. And that's kind of what I wanted to try to clear up here, the fact that Agile is actually just a set of principles and values that allow you then the freedom to choose what tools to use and choose what methods to actually implement them with. Because with the value set or the Agile manifesto, you can basically decide on your own what tools to use and how to implement the values and principles, if that makes sense. So that was the goal with this video, to basically give you that understanding of how to use Agile with your own workflow. So I hope I was able to do that, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.